What kind of woman ruins her husband's birthday in front of everyone they know? I thought it was harmless. A hug, a laugh, a spark of nostalgia. But the moment he blew out those candles without making a wish, I knew he'd already made one. A life without me. I'm Seren Alcott, 33, and if you'd asked me a few months ago, I would have said I had the perfect marriage. Daniel was steady, kind, and patient, the kind of man who fixed leaky faucets before I even noticed them, who made coffee every morning without fail. We had a home that felt safe, a son who adored his father, and a rhythm that most people would envy. But safety started to feel like stillness, and stillness started to feel like something worse, boredom. Then I ran into Evan, my ex. It wasn't planned. At least, that's what I told myself. He was at the cafe near my school, still charming, still quick to smile, still everything Daniel wasn't. We talked for a few minutes, just catching up, and when I walked away, I told myself it meant nothing. But that conversation stayed in my head longer than it should have. Evan represented a version of me I thought I'd outgrown. The wild, impulsive, fun one who didn't worry about consequences. With Daniel, I was the responsible wife, the dependable mother. With Evan, I could still feel like someone worth chasing. When I told my friend Naomi that I'd seen him, she said it was harmless, maybe even healthy to get emotional closure. That sounded like permission. Daniel's birthday was coming up, and I wanted it to be perfect. I spent weeks planning the surprise party, the decorations, the guest list, the cake. I wanted to show him how good I could be, how thoughtful. But when Evan texted saying he'd love to stop by if it wasn't weird, I hesitated for only a second before replying. Of course, it's not weird. At the time, I believed that was true. I believed I could control how things looked, how people felt, how Daniel reacted. I believed my intentions mattered more than my actions. And I believed, foolishly, that one night couldn't ruin a life. I was wrong. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The morning of Daniel's birthday started quietly, just like every other. He was still asleep when I slipped out of bed to check the decorations. Balloons hung neatly over the dining table. The cake was in the fridge, and the banner Naomi helped me make was rolled up on the counter, ready to hang. Everything looked perfect. Still, something in me buzzed with nervous energy. Not excitement, not guilt, just that restless feeling that always came when life started feeling too calm. I told myself this party would fix that. It would prove I could do something meaningful for him, that I wasn't always the impatient, distracted one. I wanted everyone, especially his mother, Marianne, to see how lucky Daniel was. I spent the morning rehearsing smiles in the mirror, deciding which dress looked both festive and effortless. The yellow one made me look alive, lighter than I felt. Around noon, I got a text from Evan. Still good for tonight? Don't want to crash the family thing. My fingers hesitated before typing back. It's not just family, friends too. Stop by for a bit if you want. I told myself I was being mature, that it was fine to invite an ex to a party because we were both adults now. The thought of seeing him again made my heart race in a way that both thrilled and scared me. Naomi came over early to help set up. She caught me checking my phone and grinned. You're waiting for someone. I tried to laugh it off. Just the catering guy. She raised an eyebrow. Or Evan. I froze for half a second too long. She said, Seren, don't tell me you actually invited him. I shrugged, pretending to be casual. It's not a big deal. He's an old friend. Naomi sighed. And Daniel. He's okay with that. I said, he doesn't need to know. It'll just be for a few minutes. When Daniel came home from work, I greeted him with a big smile and a kiss, hoping my enthusiasm would cover my guilt. He looked pleasantly surprised by the decorations, the music, the smell of dinner. You really went all out, he said, and I laughed, pretending it was nothing. For a moment, I almost believed I was doing something good. The guests started arriving, co-workers, neighbors, a few of Daniel's friends from college. The house filled with laughter and small talk. I floated around, making sure everyone had drinks, feeling like the perfect hostess. Every so often, Daniel would look over at me, smiling that calm, content smile that used to make me feel loved and now made me feel trapped. And then Evan walked in. He looked exactly the same, confident, charming, that easy grin that made people turn their heads. A few guests recognized him from years ago and murmured his name with polite surprise. I told myself it was fine. I walked over, hugged him lightly, maybe too long, and said how nice it was to see him. He said I looked amazing. I felt my cheeks burn, and I laughed, too loud, too bright. When I turned, Daniel was watching us. He didn't say anything, just nodded and went back to greeting another guest. I told myself he wasn't bothered. He wasn't the jealous type. I'd always admired that about him, until that moment, when I suddenly wished he'd show something, anything, that looked like passion. As the evening went on, Evan stayed close. He made jokes, told stories from when we dated, and everyone laughed, except Daniel. Every time Evan touched my arm or leaned in to whisper something, I felt that same electric thrill I used to crave. I convinced myself Daniel didn't notice, but of course he did. When it was time for the toast, Naomi handed me a glass of wine. She whispered, "Tone it down, okay? You're playing with fire." I smiled like she was being dramatic. "It's fine. He's not even upset." She didn't reply, just shook her head. I clinked my glass and called for everyone's attention. "To Daniel," I said brightly, "the most patient, dependable man I know." The guests laughed and I saw Daniel smile politely. I added, "And to old friends who remind us how far we've come." My eyes flicked toward Evan for just a second too long. The room went oddly still. Naomi stared at me. Evan grinned. Daniel's expression didn't change. Not anger, not confusion, just a quiet kind of resignation that made my stomach twist. Someone said it was time for the cake. I rushed to light the candles, filling the silence with laughter. Everyone gathered around. Liam stood next to his father, clapping his small hands. I handed Daniel the cake, smiling like nothing had happened. "Make a wish," I said. He looked down at the candles, then up at me. There was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, a calm, sharp certainty. Then, without a word, he blew out the candles, set the cake on the table, and walked out. The room froze. I called after him, my voice too bright, too rehearsed. "Daniel, where are you going?" He didn't turn around. The only sound was the quiet hiss of smoke curling from the extinguished candles. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Naomi put her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You went too far." I wanted to snap back, to say she didn't understand, but my throat was tight. Evan cleared his throat awkwardly and said he should get going. As he walked out, I realized the thrill I'd felt all night had vanished. All that was left was the heavy, humiliating quiet of a celebration that had turned into a goodbye. When the guests started leaving, no one met my eyes. I stood there in the half-lit room, the smell of wax and frosting thick in the air. Liam tugged at my hand and asked softly, "Is Daddy mad?" I knelt down, forced a smile, and said, "No, honey, he just needed some air." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. He didn't need air. He needed distance, from me. After everyone left, the house felt like a stage after a play. Streamers drooping, half-empty glasses on the counter, a sticky circle of wax where the cake had sat. I stood there alone, replaying the moment Daniel blew out the candles. It hadn't been angry, just final. I tried to tell myself it wasn't serious, that he'd just needed a minute. He always cooled off quickly. That was what I counted on. I cleaned up in silence, waiting to hear his car pull back into the driveway. It didn't. Around midnight, Naomi texted me, "Have you heard from him?" I wrote back, He'll come home. He just needed to think. She replied, Seren, that wasn't a small thing you did. Everyone saw it. I didn't answer. I refused to believe one awkward moment could undo everything we had. By morning, his side of the bed was still empty. I called him. No answer. I called again, left a voicemail saying I was sorry if he felt embarrassed, that I hadn't meant for it to get weird. The words sounded wrong as I said them, like they were from someone trying to save face instead of apologize. When Liam woke up, he asked where Daddy was. I told him Daddy had gone to Grandma's. It wasn't a lie. I'd already called Marianne, and she confirmed Daniel had arrived late the night before. Her voice was cold. She said, he needed somewhere quiet to think. I said, can you tell him to come home? She paused. He'll come home when he's ready, if he's ready. Then she hung up. I tried to distract myself by running errands, keeping busy, pretending everything was normal. But everywhere I went, I felt like people were looking at me. Naomi called again that afternoon. She said she'd spoken to someone who'd posted a short clip from the party. Apparently, someone had filmed the toast, me smiling, Evan laughing, Daniel's blank face right before he walked out. It's circulating, she said quietly. You need to get ahead of this before it gets worse. I felt my stomach twist. It was nothing, I insisted. He's blowing it out of proportion. Naomi sighed. You're the one who lit the fire. I snapped at her, said she was making it sound worse than it was. She said softly, you can't fix this by pretending it didn't happen. I hung up. That evening, Daniel finally texted. I need some time to figure out what's left to say. I read it over and over. The wording scared me. Cold, deliberate, not like him. I tried calling again, but he didn't answer. I left another message, saying I loved him and that we could talk. Then I messaged Evan. You started something I can't finish. Thanks for that. He replied almost instantly. Seren, don't blame me. I didn't ask to be invited. That hurt more than I expected. I typed out a long reply, then deleted it. Later that night, Naomi came over with groceries. She said Liam shouldn't see me so upset. I told her I wasn't upset, just frustrated that everyone was acting like I'd done something unforgivable. She looked at me for a long moment before saying, Seren, you flirted with your ex at your husband's birthday. That's not a misunderstanding. That's cruelty dressed as nostalgia. Her tone made me furious. I told her to leave if she was here to judge. She left quietly, saying she hoped I'd realize what I was losing before it was too late. I tried to sleep, but the house felt too still. Every creak sounded like footsteps that never came. I checked my phone every few minutes, waiting for Daniel's name to appear. It didn't. Around 2 a.m., I scrolled through the clip Naomi mentioned. It was short, 15 seconds, but enough. My voice, his face, the laughter, the silence. The comments below made my chest ache. Strangers writing things like, he deserves better. Imagine humiliating your husband like that. I wanted to scream that they didn't know me, that it wasn't what it looked like, but maybe it was. By the weekend, Marianne called again. She didn't ask how I was. She asked how Liam was. Her voice was polite but distant. Daniel's staying here for now, she said. He needs peace. I said, you're turning him against me. She said, you did that all on your own, dear. Before I could reply, she added, you humiliated him in front of his child. You don't come back from that easily. Then she ended the call. That afternoon, I went through our wedding album, flipping through pictures of the two of us smiling like we'd never run out of love. I found one where he was looking at me while I wasn't looking at him. That small, adoring look I'd always taken for granted. I didn't know why, but I started crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs. Just quiet, steady tears that felt more like disbelief than sadness. When Liam asked again where his father was, I told him Daddy would be home soon. I didn't believe it, but I couldn't bear to say anything else. On Sunday evening, Daniel came by to pick up some clothes. He didn't knock. He used his key. I was in the kitchen when I heard the door open. I turned, smiling too brightly, and said, "You're back." He said, "I'm here for my things." His voice was calm, flat, formal. I said we should talk. He said, "I don't think talking helps you." I followed him from room to room, begging him to sit down, to at least look at me. He didn't stop packing. When I reached for his arm, he gently pulled away. "You always want to control the moment," he said, "even now." I said, "I just want to fix this." He looked up then, finally meeting my eyes. "You can't fix what you don't admit." He zipped up the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked to the door. I said his name one last time. He paused but didn't turn around. "You can have the house for now," he said. "I'll call when I know what comes next." Then he was gone. When the door clicked shut, I stood there, staring at the space he'd just left. The balloons had deflated, the banner drooped, and the smell of frosting still hung in the air, a sickly reminder of how celebration had turned into separation. I told myself he'd come back. He always had before, but for the first time, I wasn't sure he would. The next morning, I woke up expecting a text, an apology, something, but there was nothing. Just a quiet house and a phone that stayed dark. Liam had gone to Marianne's for the weekend, and I hadn't even fought it. I told myself Daniel just needed space. That was how I survived the first few days, pretending this was a break, not the beginning of the end. At work, I kept my head down, pretending to be fine. My colleagues were polite but distant, their smiles too forced. One of them, a younger teacher named Allison, stopped me in the break room. She said, "Hey, I saw that video going around. I hope you're okay." I tried to laugh it off, said it was nothing, but the pity in her eyes made me want to disappear. When I got home that afternoon, Daniel's car wasn't in the driveway. Part of me had hoped he'd come back quietly, ready to talk. The house felt wrong without him. Too still, too clean. I tried calling again, and when he didn't answer, I left another voicemail, softer this time, almost pleading. "Daniel, please, we can talk about this. I messed up, but you know me. You know I didn't mean to hurt you." He didn't reply. By midweek, Marianne called. Her tone was clipped, rehearsed. "Seren, Daniel doesn't want contact right now. Please respect that." I said, "He's my husband. He can't just cut me off." She paused, then said, "He's doing what he should have done years ago, setting boundaries." That word, boundaries, felt like a slap. I started to cry, but she didn't soften. "You humiliated him, Seren. Publicly. He's not being cruel. He's protecting himself." Then she hung up. That night, I called Naomi. She didn't answer. I texted her, "You're my friend. You could at least talk to me." She replied an hour later, "I am your friend, but I can't keep defending you to everyone. You need to own what you did." I stared at her message until the words blurred. Everyone acted like I'd done something unforgivable. It was one moment, one bad choice. Did that really erase everything else? Out of anger or desperation, I'm still not sure which, I texted Evan. "You started this, you know," he replied quickly. "Don't drag me into it. You're the one who wanted me there." I said, "You didn't have to flirt back." He wrote, "You didn't have to let me." That ended the conversation. I threw my phone on the couch and told myself he was the coward, not me. The next evening, I tried showing up at Marianne's house. I brought Liam's favorite book, pretending it was for him. When she opened the door, her face didn't soften. "Daniel's not here," she said. "Please don't make this harder." I said, "I just need 5 minutes." She crossed her arms. 5 minutes won't change anything." Her voice wasn't cruel, just exhausted. That hurt more than anger. I went home shaking. I poured a glass of wine and scrolled through old pictures again. Our wedding day, vacations, Liam's first steps. Every image looked like someone else's life. Daniel's face in those photos wasn't just happy, it was trusting. That was what I'd broken. Not the love, the trust. On Thursday, A formal envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a letter from a law office. Polite, impersonal, devastating. It said Daniel had initiated legal separation. Words like property division and custody schedule leapt off the page. I read them over and over as if repetition would make them mean something else. I called him immediately. He didn't answer. I called again and again until finally he picked up. His voice was calm, detached. "Don't call me about this, Seren. The lawyers will handle it." I said, "Lawyers? You're really doing this?" He said, "You made our marriage public. Now I'm keeping what's left private." I shouted that it wasn't fair, that everyone was making me into the villain. He said, "You did that yourself." I begged him to at least come home to talk in person. He said quietly, "Home isn't the same place for both of us anymore." Then he hung up. That night, I drank more than I should have and wrote a long email to him. I said he was being cruel, that he was punishing me instead of forgiving me like a decent man would. I ended it with, "You're not the man I thought you were." I hit send without rereading it. In the morning, I woke up to a short reply. "No, I'm finally being the man I should have been." I sat staring at those words until my coffee went cold. I thought about all the times I'd teased him for being too quiet, too patient, too predictable. I used to think that made me stronger, freer. Now I realized it only made me careless. His quiet wasn't weakness, it was restraint. And now he was using that same restraint to erase me from his life, calmly and completely. The rest of that day moved in slow motion. I kept expecting someone to call, to tell me this was fixable, but no one did. Even Naomi didn't check in again. Late that evening, I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, staring at the empty half of the closet. I tried to imagine what it would sound like when he finally came back. The click of his shoes, the way he'd sigh when he set down his bag. But the silence stretched on, long and steady, like a verdict. I told myself he'd forgive me eventually. He had to. After all, I hadn't betrayed him. Not really. I'd just been careless. I repeated that word like a prayer, trying to make it sound smaller than it was. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. What I'd broken couldn't be repaired with waiting or words. And Daniel wasn't angry anymore. He was gone, and that was worse. A week passed before I saw him again. The lawyer arranged a preliminary meeting for the separation, and when I walked into that cold little office, I almost didn't recognize Daniel. He looked calm, composed, but something in his eyes had changed. A steadiness that didn't include me anymore. I tried to smile, to act normal, but he didn't return it. His lawyer shook my hand politely, explained that this was a discussion, not a confrontation. It still felt like a trial. They talked about assets, lease agreements, Liam's schedule. I barely heard the words. I kept watching Daniel's hands. How still they were, folded on the table. I remembered those hands fixing things in our house, gentle with Liam, patient with me. Now they rested like the hands of someone finished building. When it was my turn to speak, I said I didn't want this. I said I'd been stupid, that I'd made a mistake in front of people, and that it shouldn't erase everything we'd been through. My voice shook, but I kept talking, trying to sound strong. "You're throwing away years over one bad night," I said. Daniel looked at me, expressionless. "It wasn't one night. It was every time you chose to humiliate me a little to make yourself feel bigger." The room went silent. Even the lawyer hesitated. I wanted to shout that it wasn't true, but the words stuck. I felt small, cornered by truth. When the meeting ended, I followed him to the parking lot. I told him we could still fix this, that couples survived worse. He said, "Not when one of them thinks it's a game." I said I wasn't playing, that I'd just been careless. He nodded slightly. "You always call it that, careless. Like that makes it smaller." Then he got in his car and drove off, leaving me standing there with my mouth open, like I could still stop him if I found the right sentence. That night, I called Naomi. I told her about the meeting, how cold he'd been. She said, "What did you expect, Seren? That he'd thank you for reminding him how replaceable he is?" I snapped that she was supposed to be my friend. She said quietly, "Friends tell you the truth. You've been lying to yourself for too long." Then she hung up. I didn't leave the house for 2 days after that. The quiet became unbearable. I scrolled through my phone, rereading old messages from Daniel, the small ones about groceries or school events. They used to feel dull. Now they felt like proof of something I'd lost without realizing it. I wanted to text him something, anything that might reach him, but everything I typed sounded desperate. Finally, I just wrote, "I miss you." He didn't reply. When Marianne dropped Liam off Sunday evening, she barely looked at me. She said Daniel was doing fine, that Liam had been happy. I said, "So you're just taking his side completely?" She looked at me evenly. "He doesn't need a side. He has peace." Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You should start finding yours." Her words stung because they were calm, not cruel. I shut the door behind her and leaned against it, feeling the weight of my own house pressing in. Every photo on the walls seemed to accuse me. Smiling faces, matching outfits, all those small pieces of a life I'd treated like background scenery. That night, I poured myself another glass of wine and opened my laptop. I searched Daniel's name online, half afraid I'd see the video again, but instead, I found a small notice, a public record confirming the separation filing. It was real now. I'd laughed in public. He'd ended our marriage in public paperwork. In the days that followed, I started running into quiet reminders of how much he'd planned this. Bills redirected to his new address. His name removed from the utility account. Even the joint savings app wouldn't open under my login anymore. Each change felt like another layer of his patience turned into action. On Wednesday, a delivery arrived, a small box on the doorstep with my handwriting on the label. It was a package I'd mailed weeks before, a gift for him that must have been returned. Inside was a sweater I'd chosen for his birthday. It still smelled faintly of cedar and home. There was a note inside, in his handwriting, "Please stop sending things. Take care of yourself." I sat at the kitchen table with the note in my lap, staring at the clean, deliberate letters. No anger, no cruelty, just finality. I wanted to scream, to call him, to say that none of this was fair. But the truth was, it was. For once, I couldn't twist the story to make myself the victim. That evening, I took Liam to bed, read him a story, and tried not to cry when he asked if Daddy was still mad. I said softly, "No, sweetheart, Daddy's just busy right now." He nodded sleepily, already drifting off. I sat beside him until his breathing steadied, then slipped out and stood in the hallway, listening to the silence of the house Daniel had built for us. It hit me then, the thing I'd spent weeks avoiding. Daniel wasn't punishing me. He was protecting the version of himself I'd tried to destroy with my careless need for attention. His revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It was quiet, methodical, and absolute. When I walked past the kitchen, the faint smell of candles still lingered in the air. Though I'd scrubbed the counters days ago, I stood there for a long time, realizing that night would never stop replaying itself. His calm face, the flickering light, the sound of him blowing out the candles. It was the sound of him ending everything, gently and completely. The next meeting was in a brighter room, with windows that made everything look too honest. I arrived early, hoping to catch Daniel before the lawyers joined, but he was already there, sitting straight-backed with a stack of documents in front of him. I said good morning softly, trying to sound calm. He nodded without looking up. His politeness was unbearable. It made me feel like a stranger trespassing in her own story. The mediator started by summarizing what had been agreed on so far. Joint custody for Liam, division of savings, the apartment lease transferred fully to Daniel. I barely listened until I heard the word lease. I interrupted, saying I hadn't agreed to that. Daniel spoke before the mediator could. I've already arranged for a new place for Seren. It's close to Liam's school. His voice was even, as if he'd rehearsed it. I said, "You made decisions without me." He replied, "I'm making decisions that protect our son." I laughed, too loudly. Protect him from what? His mother? He met my eyes then, for the first time in days. From watching his parents pretend something healthy still exists between them. I wanted to argue, but I could see the folder his lawyer had placed on the table, neatly labeled, thick with printed pages. I knew without opening it what was inside. Screenshots, messages, maybe even copies of that party video. Proof. When the mediator asked if we wanted to speak privately, Daniel said no. "I have nothing to hide." That stung. I sat straighter and said, "Neither do I." My lawyer shot me a quick, warning look. The conversation turned to finances, and I tried to sound composed, but my hands trembled, and every word Daniel spoke made the air feel heavier. His calmness wasn't kindness anymore. It was control. He never raised his voice, never let his tone crack. It was as if he'd turned all his pain into precision. Every fact was a quiet weapon. Halfway through, the mediator suggested a break. I stepped into the hallway, clutching my phone like an anchor. Naomi had texted earlier, "Don't fight him just to feel powerful. You've already lost that." I didn't reply. I couldn't. When I came back, Daniel was speaking with his lawyer, pointing to one of the pages. I caught fragments. Something about custody terms, child support, visitation boundaries. He wasn't just ending the marriage. He was building walls to make sure I couldn't twist my way back in later. The mediator asked if either of us wanted to make a closing statement for the session. I said I did. I looked at Daniel, trying to find any sign of the man who used to look at me with such quiet devotion. "You're acting like I'm some kind of monster," I said. "I made one mistake." "One." He nodded slowly. "You made one choice, Seren. Then you defended it every day since." I said, "You could have fought for us." He replied, "I did. For years. You just never noticed." The mediator thanked us both for our cooperation. The meeting ended, papers were gathered, and everyone stood. I tried to catch Daniel as he walked toward the door. I said, "You don't have to go through with this." He paused, hand on the handle, and said, "You're right. I don't. I already did." Then he left. I stayed behind after everyone was gone, staring at the chairs we'd sat in. My lawyer cleared her throat, said gently, "He's not angry anymore. That's why you should worry." That evening, when I got home, the mailbox was full. Bills, notices, letters, with his name replaced by mine. Each envelope felt like another quiet victory for him, a slow, deliberate erasure. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by paper, trying to remember when I'd started treating love like something that needed to be tested. Later, I opened one of the envelopes, a copy of the signed separation agreement. His signature was steady, mine shaky. At the bottom, a note in his handwriting read, "Thank you for respecting the process." It wasn't personal, just polite. That made it worse. I poured a drink, staring at that line until the ink blurred. Daniel had always hated scenes, hated yelling, and now, even his revenge was quiet. No screaming, no accusations, just order, rules, and distance. He hadn't destroyed me. He'd simply outgrown me. When I turned off the lights that night, I saw the reflection of the dining room in the window, the faint shape of where the candles had burned. I realized that was the last time he'd looked at me with anything close to emotion. Everything since then had been paperwork and silence. The birthday that was supposed to celebrate him had become the night he learned how to leave me. A few weeks later, the house was almost empty. Most of Daniel's things were gone, the spaces they'd filled now quiet and accusing. Liam spent half his time with his father, and when he was gone, the silence pressed in so hard I could barely stand it. I kept telling myself I would get used to it, but every creak of the floorboards sounded like a reminder of the life I'd wasted. The final letter came on a Friday. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unmistakably his. Inside was the finalized decree, signed, stamped, finished. No room for negotiation, no last conversation. There was a note tucked behind it, just one sentence. I wish you peace, even if it took losing me to find it. I sat there for a long time, holding the paper, reading the words over and over until they stopped making sense. Peace. That was what he wanted now. What I had called boring, what I had mocked, had always been his strength. And I had traded it for noise, for attention, for the cheap thrill of nostalgia. That evening, I walked through the house, turning off the lights one by one. The dining table still had faint marks from where the cake had sat. The memory of that night replayed in perfect detail. The glow of candles, my laughter, Evan's smirk, and Daniel's quiet, steady breath as he blew the flames out. I finally understood what that moment had been. Not anger, not humiliation, but decision. When Liam called before bed, his voice was small. He said Daddy had helped him build a model rocket. I told him that sounded wonderful. After the call, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just felt hollow. Not the sharp pain of loss, but the dull ache of recognition. Daniel hadn't punished me. He'd simply walked away and left me in the silence I'd created. The same silence I used to despise now filled every corner, patient and endless. I thought about the candles again, the smoke, the quiet, and whispered to the empty room, "You got your wish after all." Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.